And do you know that chemical fertilizer produces 300 times more harmful chemicals than carbon emissions? It's a question I kept asking myself this morning. So the real harm to climate change may not be from the car you and I drive or the aeroplanes that we always sit on when we have the next flight to a destination, but from our farms, because farmers use a lot of chemical fertilizers. Did you know that? Because today we also want to tell you how some Ghanaian farmers have adopted agro-ecology methods to help solve the problem of climate change and also ensure that what we eat as produced from the farms are healthier than we think.
You know, there's just something about the countryside. It's not only more quiet and peaceful, and industrialization doesn't seem to have touched it yet, but it's also the greenery and the suggestion of harvest and productivity. In fact, even the air smells better here. But in this specific location, there might be another reason why the air is so delicious. It's probably because I'm standing in a rather unique farm. Most farms use fertilizer. This one doesn't. Most farms focus on one crop at a time. This one doesn't. Most farms have an expiry date. I bet you didn't know that. This one doesn't. How are they achieving all this? Well, they call it agroecology, and we're about to learn all about it and how it is the key to protecting our environment. Welcome to Agroecology 101. You see this? This is what healthy soil looks like. And by healthy, I mean soil that does not include any chemical fertilizers. Here in this farm, we are discovering how an organization like the Center for Indigenous Knowledge and Organizational Development is encouraging peasant farmers to farm in a way that does not deplete our ozone layer, does not cause global warming, but also produces wonderful plants and produce, like what these young cassava plants will be yielding very soon. Now, why is this important? Every time we talk about global warming, you probably hear people talking about carbon. We have to reduce our carbon footprint, the carbon monoxide from vehicles. All of these contribute towards global warming. But if you will permit me a quick chemistry lesson. On farms where fertilizer is used, a certain gas called nitrous oxide is produced. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more deadly to the ozone layer than carbon monoxide. So in essence, any farmer is probably causing more of a challenge to the environment than any driver. But today, we are going to learn how this is being turned around. Meet Mr. Ben Guri. Mr. Guri is part of the Center for Indigenous Knowledge and Organizational Development. This is a group that has dedicated itself to helping farmers farm in a more sustainable way, avoiding the chemicals and inherent damage that comes with nitrogen-based fertilizer. Mr. Guri, thank you so much for speaking to us. First, tell us a bit about this farm that we're in today.
This farm, well, it's a typical farm of a small farmer, and it's a farm that you can describe as an ecological farm. Ecological in the sense that it has, it's not a typical monocrop where you have only one crop. They have different crops growing. You have trees growing, you have plantains, you have cassava, you have different crops growing. And most important, the soil is sustained by using organic manure. We don't use any chemical manure on this farm.
Right. Now that is important. First, let's take a walk around. Let's see what this farm looks like. But also, let's learn a bit more about agroecology and why it is important. So, fertilizer. Why is it dangerous for the environment?
Well, I think it's not fertilizer. Fertilizer is good. That is the chemical fertilizer we are talking about. Chemical fertilizer, those that are artificially produced, that we think it's not good for our environment. Because agroecology is about working with nature. It's where farmers are able to work with nature to retain their soil, to add nutrients to their soil, to manage their crops while maintaining the biodiversity. Biodiversity is about maintaining all the plants that live. That is nature. Nature is living with all the plants. God created all of them because each of them has their use, they have their importance. And so we want to do farming that maintains this biodiversity at the same time.
But we know why fertilizer is used, to improve the yield and also to help farmers to farm larger pieces of land at a time. Does that mean that an ecological farm like this is less profitable?
No. It depends on how you define profit. Most of the time you define profit in terms of just cash that comes. But an ecological farm, there's a lot more you gain. First of all, it's the environment that we're protecting. The climate we just talked about. Climate change is a reality, and the only way we can do is by farming that doesn't generate these gases that destroy the environment. And secondly, it's about nutrition. Because on this farm, you don't only have maybe cassava, but you also have plantain, you have vegetables, you also have livestock even on this farm. And so the nutrition of the family, that's the profit. You might not get monetary fund if you farmed only cassava and just send it to the market. But in terms of all the other things that you benefit, it's much more profitable than monocropping.
So this is the message that your organization is pushing.
Yes.
Tell me, how are farmers responding to it?
So far, I think agroecology is a natural way of farming. In Africa here, we've all left for farming. We are basically farmers. 70 to 80% of the people are farmers. And they've all done farming, working with nature, where we all fertilize our soils until it became commercialized. And because it's commercialized, we want to increase productivity, and the quickest way is to use chemical fertilizers. And so for farmers, it's just going back to what they know. Agroecology is about doing what they know and can do best. And so here, a lot of them are adopting it. In fact, they didn't understand because we had given it a message that in order to do agriculture, you have to use chemical fertilizers, you have to use chemical pesticides. But now they get to know that how they used to do it without using these chemicals is good. And so our challenge now is how do we improve upon what they already know. So farmers already know agroecology, and so it's easy for them to adopt, and they're actually adopting. Just like the example is this farm that we see Mr. Nati, who's been doing agroecology all his life.
Now let's talk about scale. Mr. Nati's farm is wonderful, idyllic. I love it. I'm enjoying myself here, but it's not very big.
Yes.
Is it possible to scale up agroecology?
In agroecology, what we also promote is family farming, because in Africa here, family is still strong. The base of our society is family. So we're encouraging that every family, and the land here is all segregated in small pieces. So we're encouraging that every family that has a piece of land should use it to produce food to feed the family first, and then, of course, send to the market to make profit. And so for us, scaling is about increasing the number of small families that are engaged in agroecology. It's not about one person having hundreds of hectares of land, but that all farmers with a small piece of land are adopting agroecology.
Right. Now, with the government pushing towards mechanized farming on a larger scale, do you find that your project will still be relevant?
Yes. Mechanization is important. As I said, one of the major challenges of agroecology is labor constraint, because as you know, you could use weedicides and just spray with one person and kill all the weeds. But in agroecology, sometimes you have to do it mechanically, and that needs labor. And so we are looking for mechanization, simple mechanization that can help them to deal with, let's say, weed control. And so we need a mechanization, but it might be a different form of mechanization. Not a mechanization of huge tractors that will harrow, so much land at the same time. So we still need that support, but we need appropriate technologies, appropriate mechanization that they can use in agroecological farms.
Has Mr. Nete had it easy? Are there some challenges to employing agroecology?
Yes, of course, lots of challenges. As I said, the number one concern of agroecology is labor, because it's labor intensive, And number two is, also related to labor, is getting the youth interested. Because it's not as romantic as the so-called chemical farming, where you bring a tractor and harrow the whole place, clear all the trees and plant in lights and apply fertilizer. That's a more romantic way of looking at it. But real agroecology is about working with nature. And most of the young guys don't want to do it. So that's the challenge we have, the labor constraint, and particularly getting our young people interested in it. You know, the second aspect we can also look at is in terms of if we talk about soil fertility, we want to maintain the organic matter in the soil. Of course, right now, this farm here, during a dry season, when it's dry, somebody comes to set a fire and everything goes. So what is it that's going to decompose into the soil? That's also a challenge we have, and that's some of the areas we need to look at how to deal with that. Of course, water and all that is also rain dependent, because agroecology is also working with nature, so it also depends on nature. And as you know, of climate change, we cannot predict the rainfall now. So there are many challenges to do with agroecology.
Now, it occurs to me that most small-scale farmers or peasant farmers might not have the same level of education as their larger-scale counterparts, or perhaps people in other professions. Does the Center for Indigenous Knowledge and Organizational Development find a challenge in communicating the ecological benefits and the technical aspect of agroecology to these farmers?
Yeah, the challenge is, for me, the fortune is that agroecology is not very different from what our farmers know. So sometimes we rather learn from them, because our training for the diamond agriculturist, my training has been how to do modern agriculture. And in Ghana, the policies about modernization of agriculture. So that takes us away from the agriculture that our farmers know. So rather, we learn a lot from our farmers on how to do agroecology, how they're able to maintain, to control pests without chemicals, how they're able to maintain their soil fertility without chemicals. And so we learn a lot from them. But in addition, we try to help them improve with new technologies. For example, tree-based soil fertility, which is what we call farmer-managed natural regeneration, where you farm together with the trees. What you do, you prune your trees in such a way that you don't have to cut the tree down, but just prune it to re-fertilize the soil. So those new technology, we also try to introduce it to them. But I must say, agroecology, our farmers know it better than we do who have gone to learn agriculture in the universities.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So should a nation that still relies so heavily on agriculture, should they be taking any lessons from the work that you are doing on a national level, at a government level?
Yes.
Which part of what you are doing can be adapted?
Yes. I think we, civil society and the farmers groups, have been advocating that today, globally, I think agroecology is the answer. It's the answer to our food system, it's the answer to climate change, it's the answer to a lot of the problems that we have today. And we think that, especially at this time that we're having the Africa climate change, we should tend to focus and see how do we get our governments to look at their nationally determined solution for climate change, focusing on agroecology for Africa, because the push is still for modernization of agriculture, but that's by the interested companies that are outside that are producing these chemicals and they want to market. They are still pushing that. But for us today, I think globally, even the FAO has recognized that agroecology is the way. So for Africa, I think for this week, they should come up with a united voice and say that agroecology is the policy we want to follow for our food systems in Africa.
Now, I did a bit of research before I came here to meet you, and I discovered that the nitrogen pollution is far more impactful than carbon pollution. But every time people talk about global warming, they talk about carbon, carbon monoxide, and emissions from vehicles and aircraft and all of that. But if really 1 ton of nitrogen gas is more deadly to the environment than 300 tons of carbon, are we not focusing in the wrong place?
Yes. And that is why we think that agroecology is an issue that should be very important. Because most of the nitrogen comes from agriculture, especially from the nitrogen fertilizers. A lot of it comes from that. And so we think that if we really want to address the climate change, yes, the carbon issue is very important, but also the nitrogen issue, which is mostly from from farming. We need to look at a farming system that actually reduces the use of nitrogen. And that is agroecology. And so we think that this is an opportunity for Africa. The focus always is about adaptation. How do we adapt to all these, the challenges of climate change? It's about adapting our farming system, which is just about going back to agroecology, which is what our farmers were already doing, because the so-called modernization of agriculture was introduced to us.
Is your work expensive? Going around explaining this concept to farmers, helping them, giving them the support to actually change from nitrogen-based fertilizers and chemical farming to ecological farming?
Yes. No, it's expensive in the sense that to get information across, it's not cheap. We are standing here trying to get this information together. It costs money. If you have to get out to rural areas to talk to people, it takes money. You need to take people who go to talk to them, so it takes money. And we think that government should take it as a national policy and look at especially our extension system. How do we re-educate them? In fact, they need to unlearn the things we learned at school and relearn this new concept of agroecology and send them out to the communities. And that takes money. So government must shift their budget. In fact, right now, part of the advocacy we have is that government is spending so much money, the agricultural budget, basically for chemical fertilizers. If you look at the budget for extension, it's almost zero. Government should shift that budget instead of subsidizing chemical fertilizer to subsidize extension, for example, and extension for agroecology, where that people go out of expertise and support these farmers that are already agroecology. So it's expensive, but I think Ghana, we have the money. It's just we are not prioritizing correctly. We're putting all our money into the so-called chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides. We could get it much cheaper by subsidizing, for example, organic manure. We now have companies producing organic manure. And even we believe that the cheapest way we would to support the farmers to produce even organic manure on their own fields. Because it's so simple and they know how to do it.
Is there not nitrogen in organic manure?
There is nitrogen, but it's a different form of nitrogen. It's not a nitrogen that's easily released because it's locked up in the organic manure. And so therefore, in that form, it's safe to use. But when you add the direct nitrogen, that's easily converted to gaseous forms, gaseous nitrous oxide, which is what is dangerous.
Let's have a look around. Let's see what there is. So for a farmer like Mr. Nati, he has been doing it for years. But if somebody who is more used to the old ways of nitrogen-based fertilizer wanted to change, tell me about that process. What would they have to go through and how much would it cost them to simply stop using one type of fertilizer or pesticide and start agroecology?
Of course, it's impossible to say today I've stopped using chemical fertilizer and moving to agroecology. It has to be a transition, a transition period to move gradually from the chemical fertilizers to the organic. Let me be very clear that it's not that the chemical fertilizers are bad. It is the overuse of it. And so sometimes you can reduce your chemical fertilizer and increase your organic manure gradually until you get to a point that you can go 100% organic. It has to be a transition. That way, transition. Of course, it costs much less because chemical fertilizer, if you look at the price versus organic manure, it's much less expensive. So moving to agroecology is a cheaper option.
Are there other countries around the world where they have gained great success with agroecology?
Well, Cuba is a number one example where they're forced by circumstances where America and others stopped exporting chemical fertilizers to them as a political punishment. And they adopted organic farming 100%. And today they're the leading producer, and they're feeding themselves. Even today, you see countries like Germany, countries like France, they're all now using agroecology becomes their national policy that they are promoting. And these are industrialized countries. And they have less disadvantage to convert back to agroecology. We are already practicing it, and so that's what we want to say, that if developed countries like Germany are promoting agriculture, then we already are a step forward ahead of them. And so our governments should also adopt agroecology as the policy, as a food systems policy for Africa, rather than this so-called modernization that they are pushing.
Mr. Benguri, I feel like I've been into a lecture. I've learned such a lot from you. Thank you so much. And I think I'll leave you now so I can go and enjoy a bit more of the wonderful fresh air that only an agroecological farm can provide.